understand the breadth and depth of evidence available on a particular topic. They play a crucial role in informing policy decisions, guiding research priorities, and enhancing our overall understanding of complex issues. During today's webinar, we will share how the Western Cape government is using evidence maps as a tool to visually represent available evidence for a given research or practice area, the amount of evidence that exists, and where the gaps are in the evidence base. We'll guide participants on how to develop and use an evidence map. We'll showcase practical examples and applications by presenting case studies on the learnings emanating from Western Cape government departments in the development of their own evidence maps. This may provide insights on how you can leverage evidence maps in your own work. And then we will conclude with the launch of some exciting news in the evidence mapping space. We have an excellent lineup of speakers who are experts in this field, and they are eager to share their knowledge and experiences with you. I'm excited to introduce our speakers. Dr. Zinat Ismail is the Chief Director of the Directorate Strategic Management Information, located in the Department of the Premier of the Western Cape Government. This Chief Directorate has evolved into the Provincial Data Office, and she also fulfills the role of Chief Data Officer. Dr. Ismail will do the welcome and share the strategic context. Dr. Yusri Tofi, he is a data and evidence specialist in the Provincial Data Office, and he will talk about the steps to develop an evidence map. Ms. Mushfiqa Sali is a Deputy Director in the Department of the Premier and is primarily responsible to coordinate building a community of practice for data governance across Western Cape government departments and external stakeholders. She will present the evidence map created for Western Cape government priority data sources. Ms. Inga Surti-Duplessis, Deputy Director, and Ms. Charlene Roman, Assistant Director, work in the Western Cape Department of Education, and will share their journey on developing an evidence map on their department's legislation and policy landscape. Our final speaker will be Mr. Faisal Noordin, also a Deputy Director in the Provincial Data Office, and he drives the initiative to develop an integrated indicator system with supporting data trend analysis. He will present the evidence map on South African mental health. We encourage you to actively participate, ask questions, and engage in discussions throughout the session. There will be an opportunity at the end of each main segment of the program to share your comments or to ask questions. You will be prompted at the appropriate time to raise your hand to indicate if you wish to contribute to the conversation. A reminder to keep your microphone muted during the session unless you are speaking, in which case unmute yourself. And if you are able to put on your camera while speaking, please do so. The program will be interspersed with activities where you'll be asked to vote on what you think best describes an evidence map. We'll test your knowledge on basic evidence mapping concepts and where you see the added value of an evidence map in your area of work. Your participation in the activities will be anonymous, and we invite you to take part in this Time to Talk data session. We would also like to acknowledge our partnership with the Africa Evidence Network and the Pan-African Collective for Evidence in creating this platform. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to a productive and enlightening webinar. It is now my privilege and pleasure to hand over to Dr. Ismail for the welcome and setting the strategic context. Dr. Ismail.
Thank you, Peter. I would like to make a kind request, Peter. Would it be fine if you actually remove the screen and actually ask everybody to show perhaps proof of life. So we all say hello to each other as part of the welcoming. Thank you. Show the faces. Thank you. Almost there. You can hide for the rest of the webinar. Now I'm going to speak off the cuff and just say, welcome to everybody. Good morning. Salam. Molo. Goeiemorgen. And I trust that you will have a insightful, refreshing discussion around data and evidence. Now I'm going to upfront say, we have walked a journey, the Provincial Data Office, before we could be comfortable in talking to you about evidence mapping or just developing an evidence map. It didn't come easy. It's a concept that we took on 2018 or 19. It was just before COVID. We engaged the organization 3IE, and you can look on the website 3IE. We've referenced them in the data governance practice note. And it took effort to put a concept on the table, to localize it and provincialize it. We took learnings from anyone that actually attempted or did evidence maps. Suffice to say, our biggest learning came from the initiative, Responsive Evidence Application for Policy Making. It's a partnership that we are having. And together with the Africa Evidence Network. And the application now of the evidence map is within the education sector and also in the mental health sector. Now, this is only on evidence, on the evidence maps. But the question it is, why data governance practice notes? For those of you that walked the journey within Western Cape government, and I still see some of Western Cape government's faces. I don't see them, they're still hiding. I see Ilse, you're still hiding, and I see a few still hiding. But we walked through a journey on data governance and maturing data governance. And in December, recently, we have actually tabled our data governance policy framework. And we had our collaboration, consultation, and engagement with a number of stakeholders. But now we need to implement the data governance policy framework. And one of the key initiatives from the data governance policy frameworks is a series of data governance practice notes. And while there are some data governance practice notes, which is very directive, where it sets direction, it gives guidance, And that guidance may be just in terms of a scheduling of events that need to take place in the data value chain. There are practice notes that actually give direction or it enable a methodology or an approach. So this is not the first data governance practice notes. We are looking forward to actually share with you a number of other practice notes very soon. But the foundation is the data governance policy framework and the data governance value chain as the introduction and a context to share that this data governance practice note on evidence mapping or evidence map is not in isolation. And the question may be, shouldn't it actually, why call it a data governance practice note? So we're not married to the terminology, but for now, it is a core delivery from a data governance policy framework. So we're looking forward for future practice notes on data management plan, master data management, metadata management, data ethics, data quality, data sharing, data access, data portals, small geographical area, and others along the pipeline that will be more strategic than operational towards building a responsive evidence system. And hopefully you can walk this journey with us. So thank you for your participation. We need you because you are the people that's passionate about data and evidence. So we need you to drive these data governance practice notes with us. Hopefully, we can hold hands together. So enjoy the session, have fun. I in particular look forward to the voting section. I hope, Mushfika, I will be able to answer your exam questions. So I look forward to that. And welcome again. Thank you.
Thank you, Zinat, for welcome and for setting that context. Yeah, so to get everyone thinking about where you see the added value of an evidence map within your organization or area of work, we will now ask you to vote on what you think best describes an evidence map. When you see the poll on your screen, please select your answer and submit it, after which you will be directed to exit the poll. You have about 30 seconds to do so. Although your vote will be anonymous, unlike voting in an election, it won't be secret, because if you open the chat box, you should also be able to see how others are responding to the question. So I invite you now to please go ahead and submit your answers. It is interesting to follow in the chat box just to see how the responses are coming in. So thank you very much for your participation. At the moment, it's almost like the Olympic Games. It's leading into that final straight, and you're seeing somebody coming from behind or leading. So at the moment, it's a tool for decision making. It's a visualization tool. All of the above. So please continue voting if you haven't done so already. We will move into the next main segment of this webinar, and it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker to you. It's Dr. Yusri Tofi. Dr. Tofi, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing me to present on this process, and just want to link what Dr. Ishmael was saying in the beginning, that this has been a process, it's been a journey for all of us. I want to open my presentation with a statement that I want to say that the development and the use of evidence maps should be seen as a value chain, starting from identification of a question from someone, right through the development of the question, the development of the evidence, the understanding of the evidence, the scoping of the evidence, right through the optimal use and the utilization of the evidence map by all stakeholders. So the whole, it is not only for us techies out there to see how can we create the evidence map. We need to look at the evidence map through this value chain right from the start in order to there. So this presentation is not designed to give you the technical know-how how to produce a evidence map, but rather to sketch the journey that needs to be undertaken to produce a evidence map successfully. We will, of course, during the course of this this webinar, point you to the right direction, point you to a direction if you want to embark on this journey. And one final thing before I start is that I just want to iterate that we need to understand that evidence mapping as a methodology falls within the evidence synthesis family. It's the same way as literature reviews or systematic reviews or scoping reviews. It is not designed to create new data or evidence, but rather for us it's a tool for us to visualize and group evidence for us to understand it better. Okay, so I want you to look at the graphic in front of you. So these are the 6 steps, okay, and I will go into each one of them, but I want to show you that this process is progressive. It starts at step 1 and it moves to step 6, right through there. But also what's important for you to understand is that there is interaction between the steps along the way. There is between finding evidence and describing evidence, there's interaction. So you do step 1, you go to step 2 and step 3, and then you find something in step 3, then you go back to step 2. So there's interaction between the steps as well as progressing, from question to using the evidence base in the end. Okay, next slide. So let's go into each one. To us, I think to us, the most important step in the whole evidence map development is around the research question. Because if you understand the research question, if you understand what you want to know, if you understand that, everything will fall in place. You need to understand the research question. You need to understand the inclusion criteria to encompass the parameters of the question, and of course, then what you need to do is understand the resulting mapping framework you need to answer the question. So in this step, there is several components. The first one is, I keep on saying it's very important, but I think you need to understand that especially the first component, which is establishing a working group and exploring the problem, is extremely important, because here you really put the people that will drive the whole process. Remember what I was said in the previous slide in terms of a value chain. You need to understand that you need the right people all the people in the room in order to drive this whole process forward. So depending on the question, you will have different people and stakeholders, but the most important ones they will always have is your map owner, which is your department or your public entity that will ultimately house the map. You need your content matter experts to understand what is needed to answer the question. And of course, you need your evidence mapping experts in order to convert what you are finding into a visual tool for you to see in the actual map. So you need interaction between these groups to drive the definition of the mapping questions. Then, so what you then need to do is there needs to be extensive stakeholder engagement. Everybody needs to understand what the question is that you are asking. And our colleagues from health and education will talk to this when we go into the case studies. But we went through the whole process. And for example, education, the question they came up with, what is the body of evidence around the relevant legislation and policy landscape that regulates the education system in the Western Cape? And health looked at what the legislation, mental health policies, clinical guidelines, circulars, and therapeutic interventions that exist for psychiatric illnesses applicable in South Africa. So it was a complete question that drives the process forward. Go to the next slide, Peter. So now you understand the question. Now what the next step, what you need to do is that you need to understand what the evidence would be. What is the you must ensure that the evidence map includes the most pertinent evidence that will address the research question. And what we normally use is the process, the PCOS system, which is people, interventions, comparator, outcomes in study design, as a process to kind of make it easy and for people to understand what the pertinent evidence is to address the research question. So, for example, Department of Health and the people, it was the whole of South Africa. The intervention was mental health. There was no comparator in their case. The outcomes was mental health, and the study design was legislation, the research and policies and circulars that existed in the system to address these issues. The Department of Education, the same thing. So now you understand the question, you understand the parameters of the evidence that you need. Now, what then you need is you need to understand the evidence map framework that you need, and what would be the most optimal visual representation of that evidence for you to understand what you have in front of you. So next slide. So this is based on the question in the mental health evidence map. This is basically what we then came up with health. For example, if you look at the x-axis, you see the sectors that promote well-being. For example, retention and care, early childhood development, parental. These are the sectors that promote well-being. And on the y-axis, you have the type of population that exists within the domain. And then what you would then do is you would then look at evidence, and for example, under parental controls, in national policy, if you find something there, then that cell would be populated, and in that way, so in that way, when you complete your process, you will have a clear understanding of how your evidence is presented to the stakeholders. Next slide. So now you know your question, right? You understand what type of evidence you need. You understand how the evidence needs to be presented. Now you need to understand what evidence what are you need to search for evidence and screen for inclusion. You need to then develop a comprehensive search strategy to include relevant data and evidence on the identified mapping question. And in this case, we did a example. I don't know, colleagues, if you can see nicely. This was just an example which we added, and this is a screening process that looked at identifying relevant intervention studies on the impact of gender salary discrepancies in the manufacturing sector post 1990. So here, through the four processes, the blue, I don't know, it's identification, screening, eligibility, and included on the y-axis. And then here, this was very insightful to me, because you started out with more than 16,000 potential records, and in the end, through this rigorous process, you only ended up with 19 studies that you actually put through the process. Okay, so that is just a nice example of a comprehensive search strategy that you need to do. Then the step 3 is describing the evidence. So the data extraction and coding process. Now you've identified the 19 studies. Now what you then need to do is to extract the information that you need from those evidence products to produce the map. So next slide. Now you know what evidence you need, or what evidence you have. So what is a very important step after that is actually to appraise the evidence that you have. You need to critically appraise the evidence in establishing trust information by rigorously and systematically reviewing its fit for purpose. You need to understand, you need to be comfortable with the evidence that you find is fit for purpose and of quality, in order for it to be relevant for your map. And then step 5 is that's a tricky part of it. It's two components in there. It's organizing the evidence base for versatile analysis and reporting, and using an interactive mapping interface to actually visualize the evidence, and you'll see in the examples that we have in the end. And as a behavior specialist, step 6 is I think, to me, extremely important. And that is actually not only to create the product or tool. The value of it is actually sharing and demonstrating the visual tool to stakeholders, to be able, through a robust communication and dissemination strategy, to make the map accessible to appropriate users. And the only way to do that is by dragging everybody, by making sure that right in the beginning, when you created your working group, to make sure that all your stakeholders are with you on your journey to this. So for example, if you now socialize your tool, if you now ask your DG or your director, okay, this is now very nice, it is a very nice tool to use, and then they turn around and say, what is this? I don't know anything about this. So it's important for us to make sure that the stakeholders we identify in the beginning, we bring through, right? So to make sure that the utilization of the tool is then optimally used, and to facilitate its intended use as a tool for evidence-informed policy making. Colleagues, that is basically the 6 steps that you need to do, or embark on. I always say it's a journey, and really it is a journey, and it's important. The progression through the steps is important for you to understand what the purpose are of each step in order to create this process. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Yusri. Thank you for sharing the steps to develop an evidence map. We can see that the development of an evidence map involves a structured six-step process that's designed to synthesize and present evidence for informed decision-making in public policy. There will now be an opportunity for questions and answers. So please raise your virtual hand if you have a question or comment. And if you do, then please introduce yourself and then you can go ahead with your question. We will also, during this time, launch a short quiz, 3 questions to test your knowledge. It is a requirement that you successfully complete all 3 questions to be able to progress to the next part of the webinar. And I'm just having a light moment there, so not serious. But
It's
as
an exam
mentioned,
question.
yeah. But as mentioned earlier, when you see the question on your screen, please select your answer and submit it before the next question is launched. So I'm going to take a few hands before we then start launching the quiz. I can just get a...
Mr. E's hand is up.
Okay, I see we have the folder ISO. Are there any other takers at this stage? Okay, Foldy, please come off mute. Just briefly introduce yourself and then please make your comment or ask your question.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. All the ESO, I work with the PDO. Specialization is not evidence mapping, just curious. I'm willing to wait, but I think given the input made by Dr. Tofi, and possibly when education and health, and I know Faisal is presenting on mental health, but to provide the insight in terms of what was the sort of derived, benefit and motivation why they actually opted to go the evidence mapping route in this case. And I'm pretty sure a lot of departments in this room are probably just as curious in the sense of, is this a new tool or is it going to make my life easier? But I think given the presentation, I'm willing to wait after your presentation for you to share with us immediate benefits, insights that you may have acquired with evidence mapping, and possibly areas for improvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Foldy. I'm confident that we probably will be able to solicit that type of feedback from the presenters when we get to that stage, and I think it will be, as you say, very valuable to everybody. I think just to hear what those lessons are and value being derived for their own purposes. Thank you for that. Are there any other questions? I don't see any hands yet. I think, Mishwika, in the meantime, you can maybe just launch our quiz so long. Thank you. And please go ahead and select the answer that you think is correct and submit it. Thanks. It's good to see of the 60 plus responses that we've got so far that 97% of you have selected that there are 6 steps to develop an evidence map. I think we can launch the next question, Mishwika. So you can see the next question is, what is the most important step of developing an evidence map? Please select the option that you believe to be the most accurate. Okay, so it looks like as if most of you have put that clarifying the scope for purposes of creating the evidence map is the most important step in developing the evidence map. Some of you also think that using the evidence base or critical appraisal of evidence is important, which they are. But it is important right from the outset to make sure that the scope is clear. Mishfika, the final question. Thank you. So our final question is, which of these are not a benefit of an evidence map? And you are welcome to enter your responses into that. The results of the quiz will be shared later on during this session.
Everybody passes, Peter.
Okay, so I think thank you everybody for your responses and for participating in the quiz. If you are still finishing up, please continue to do so, but we're going to move ahead with the program and move into the next segment of the program, which is namely the case studies of evidence maps that's been co-created with the Provincial Data Office. And as we indicated, there are 3 case studies that we will refer to. I'm going to hand over to Mishfika Sali to share with us the first one, which is the Western Cape Government priority data sources. Mishfika, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, can you see the spreadsheet?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So as a start, in 2021, we conducted a diagnostic evaluation to explore and discover priority data sources across the 13 departments that speak to the recovery plan post-COVID-19. And through that evaluation, we produced the spreadsheet where we captured all the information on the different data sources, characteristics related to it, as well as the metadata. But as you can see, it's quite a lot of data. It's over 100 pieces of data sources. And it's not really user-friendly, easy to share, and at first look, it requires a bit of deep analysis to just understand what the set is saying. So what we decided to do was to explore evidence maps to see how can we visualize or map this evidence to make it more user-friendly for our stakeholders and also for future planning. So we have produced this map. So at first, there is an x-axis and the y-axis, and across the x-axis, we plotted the 13 departments. And down the y-axis, we plotted the strategic priorities of jobs, well-being, governance, and safety. In total, there are about 180 records that is sitting in the map. It was created in a program called EpiReviewer, and the mapping component of it, where we actually created the visual, was done in a program called EpiMapper. And this really allows you to interact with different components of the evidence that is visualized in the map. So when you look at the map, you can see that there are many bubbles across it. And there are different ways within which you can filter the evidence within the map. So looking at the bubbles, I'll use this as an example. The green we filtered as open data sources, and the red we filtered as not open data sources. And the size of the bubbles will indicate the amount of evidence that is in that space. And at the same time, you are also able to see where there are gaps in the evidence across the priority areas and departments. So if I click on the bubbles, there'll be a pop-up that will come up where I can still able to filter by department and strategic priority. As I filter, the list in the middle will change, and it will just list the different records. And in the last screen on the far right-hand side, there'll be additional metadata on the actual evidence, I think, to when it is created, who created it, who's the owner, etc. And these are the type of details that you can specify when you are creating the map. Exit this. Okay. There's also an opportunity to add information about the map. So even though you're sharing the map in the form of a URL, users will be able to automatically see and know more about the map. And this is where you can add key information that explains your rationale and explains your framework and what included and what excluded out of the map. Then these are filters, where you are also able to filter the different pieces of information linked to the evidence that you particularly want to see. And then there are different styles within which you can view the map. Thank you.
Thank you, Mushfika. I see Mr. Issa, you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Okay, I'm just being flippant here. But if I look at the screen in front of me, and I see the bubble for the department data as well. Especially for row 1 on jobs.
Yes, Mr. Ian?
Okay, now, is that it? For me, this is very weird. For Western Cape government, I would imagine the converse. DP has a bigger bubble than DDAT, who's supposed to be a custodian in terms of jobs and strategic priorities. Just think about that. I'll leave you with that thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Foldy. And yes, if we can maybe just keep the questions to the end. There's still 2 further case studies that we want to present. And I think it will be good if once we've had all 3 presented, because there may be questions that either get answered in the next 2 or that overlap, and then we can maybe deal with them all at the end. Zenit, I see you have your hand. Do you
Yeah,
wish to
no,
ask
no,
a
thank
question?
you, Peter. I'm trying to respond to any questions in the chat box also.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Yes.
But I think very importantly, Mr. E have just highlighted a gap, and that is part of the value of the evidence map to identify gaps. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mishika. We are going to proceed with the next case study, and that is the Western Cape Education Department's legislation and policy landscape. So I invite Inga Sleti Duplessis and Shalane Roman to please come and speak to us about their evidence map. I think interesting to know is that I know that there are over 700 school-based and head office policies just within the education space. So one can immediately sort of like see that there may have been a challenge and a need for this evidence map. Colleagues, over to you.
Thank you so much, Peter. Okay, so the evidence map displayed on the screen is a tool used to create visual maps of evidence. In our case, a visual map of the Western Cape Education Department's legislation and policy landscape, which then covers legislation, policies, frameworks, and guidelines. So currently, the WCED has a policy register, which is compiled in an Excel spreadsheet, similar to the one that Mushfika showed earlier, listing all our departmental policies and legislation relating to education, which has been drafted by the respective directorates across the department. But we note, however, that this may not be user-friendly, and it may be better to have a visual tool such as the evidence map you see before you, which shows which sector and domain that the policy or law falls into. I know a question was asked, what motivated us to draft this, to make use of the evidence map. We will cover that as well in our presentation. So we have not launched our evidence map yet. It is still in the developmental or experimental phase. However, in its current form, we can already identify where there are policy or legislative gaps, which area is heavily regulated on, and then where it is lacking as well. So the WCED has more than 800 policies, and what we found challenging was to narrow down the relevant or applicable items to include and which to exclude in this map. Another challenge was determining the domains and subdomains, and then identifying which domain or subdomain was best suited to place the policy or legislation. Shalane will now go through the live evidence map, which you see on the screen.
Good morning, everyone. So first of all, you will find dots. The blue dots we've allocated to policies. The red dots are allocated to frameworks and guidelines. And the green dots are allocated to legislation. The columns on the y-axis are the domains. In this column is the domain called the basic functionality. There are 9 domains on the evidence map. One is the basic functionality. The next one is behavior and safety. Then we have teaching and learning. We have governance, parents and community, leadership and management, learner achievement, human resource management, infrastructure and institutional support, and early childhood development. It was further broken down into subdomains, which I will show you just a little bit, just a few examples of. So under the basic functionality as a domain, we've created subdomains, which we will find documents relating to the certain issues, such as school fees, as admission-related issues, the South African Schools Act, health-related issues, funding-related issues, attendance-related issues. Under behavior and safety, you'll be able to find the behavior and emotional assistance-related issues, school safety and security, gender and diversity-related issues. And under teaching and learning, you'll find, for instance, e-learning, curriculum and assessment, the National Senior Certificate queries, further education and training. Under governance, parents and community, you will find documents relating to parent and school-related issues, the code of conduct, representation of the Council of Learners. And under leadership and management, you'll find tariffs and teacher development. Under learner achievement, curriculum and assessment, and national senior certificates. Under human resource management, you'll find documents relating to recruitment and selection, service benefits. And infrastructure and institutional support, you'll find property-related documents, learner transport, LTSM and procurement-related documents. And early childhood, we've just kept one subdomain, also early childhood, because it was recently transferred to the education department. So from the education department side, we have drafted no new legislation or policies relating to early childhood development. What we've plotted under this item. So our sectors, we've gathered all the sectors operating under education. So public schools, for public schools, we have public schools as a whole. There are some collaboration schools. There are some schools that offer online and virtual schools. And then we have a column for inclusive and specialized education. Again, early childhood development, homeschooling, and independent schools. After compiling the data, it was established that most content sits under the teaching and learning, and under curriculum and assessment related matters. In this block, we have 28 policies and 19 guidelines, with one legislation for the public school sector. And for inclusive and specialized education, you can find 20 policies and 9 frameworks. And based on the projections of the final version of the evidence map, it was clear that we could see a gap in the education policy landscape under the sector collaboration schools, online virtual schools, early childhood development, and homeschooling. For in the instance where there are more policies, guidelines, and legislation, where there are more policies that are applicable to more than one sector, we were able to plot it as such on the map, and therefore the user will be able to find all the relevant resources based on a specific domain or a subdomain.
So, Shalane, if I were to look for policies or any documents relating to a code of conduct, where would I go?
So if I'm from a public school, I would then go to the domain called governance, parents, and community, and I'll find the subdomain code of conduct. I will be able to click in the block, and I will find all my documents relating to the code of conduct for schools. So you will find the topic or the subject, a brief summary of the document, as well as the link, whereby we will be able to click on the link and it will take you directly to the website where you will find the document, including all the annexures and attachments needed. Anything else?
Perfect. Yes, thank you, Shalane. So if I were to look for something, there's a lot going on with POPIA and PIA. So if I were to look for information relating to the protection of information and also the right to the access to information, where would I find that?
Okay, using another way of finding the tool, we can go to, this is a simpler way as well to use it. We can use this filter, and we will find protection of and access to information. So even if you click more than one item, all your documents will be, you can find all your documents in one row. So you are looking for promotion of access to information, right? And there you will find the privacy policy template for public schools in terms of Protection of Personal Information Act with a brief summary, as well as the document attached for your ease of reference and reading. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Elaine. So building an evidence map is a collaborative and interactive process that demands careful planning, attention to detail, and a commitment to making the tool accessible and actionable. While the process can be time-consuming and challenging, the outcome, which is a clear evidence-based tool, can significantly impact educational practice, policy, and legislation. So a few tips which we could give you to those who are interested and who may consider also making use of such a tool is to start with the clear objective, because to ensure that the objective is specific and well-defined, because a poorly defined objective can lead to an overwhelming amount of data and a very confusing map. And then to engage stakeholders early to ensure that the map addresses relevant issues and is tailored to the needs of its users. By engaging stakeholders late in the process can result in misalignment between the map and its intended use. And then to use the visuals effectively. As you could see, we used the round, colorful dots. And Mushfika showed you earlier that you could also use the donut, which was hollow on the inside with the color on the outside. So you could choose which visual tool suits you best. And then seek feedback, share the drafts with stakeholders, and be open to feedback and improvement. Because rushing to finalize the map without adequate review can lead to errors or missed opportunities for refinement. And always consider the end user. Keep the end users in mind throughout the process. Think about how they will interact with the map and what information will be most useful to them. If the map is not tailored to the needs of its users, it may not be utilized effectively. And most importantly, plan for updates, because establish a plan for regularly updating the map to incorporate new policies and legislation to maintain its relevance. An outdated evidence map can quickly become obsolete. So therefore, it's important for your map to be kept current and useful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Inga, and thank you, Shalane. This was really insightful, and we really enjoyed the way that you interactively and engage with each other. So it made it really, it certainly put a smile on many of our faces, but also to hear, you know, specifically the last bit around the tips and the learnings that you've presented to us. So thank you so much for giving us the insights that you have. I know that there are questions in the meeting chat, and we'll get to them as we go along. Thank you for those. Please continue to keep those questions coming. Our last case study that we will be presenting is one that we did with the Western Cape Department of Health and Wellness, specifically around the South African mental health. And I now invite Faisal Nurdin to present for us that map. Faisal, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, everybody. I think Vika is going to share the map with everybody. Okay, so from our side, in the province is a renewed focus on mental health, right? And this is in the context of very tough socioeconomic conditions in many of our communities. Our health system is also under strain due to a high population growth and other factors, etc. The PDO itself is also assisting the overall mental health steering committee for the province. And here we provide various support, including indicator development, assisting with the theories of change, etc. The evidence map for mental health was conceptualized to assist clinicians or primary and tertiary health facilities on the ground, having access to mental health research and guides and organizing that and circulars, etc., to efficiently respond to service delivery. There's an evidence advisory group for mental health, which is made up of renowned specialists in the field of mental health. These include academics, leading administrators in the Department of Health, etc. And they were the main client in developing the mental health evidence map. If you think about it, this conglomerate of academics and leading clinicians would be a valuable resource for any individuals working on the ground, dealing with mental health, etc. So I think for me, one of the key benefits is with us working with them, that you're developing an evidence map for mental health, but you're getting their expertise, and that evidence map can be easily shared with a large, broad base. The evidence advisory group. So how this evidence map works is the evidence advisory group sources, reviews, and grades the evidence that will be included in the evidence map. And then there's sort of approval for what evidence gets included into the map, etc. But they're also responsible for the designing and completing the evidence base. And this gives you the attributes which are important, the layout of the map, etc. The mental health evidence map is firstly based on categorizing evidence by mental health disorders. And if you look at the x-axis here, it's broadly from like clinical diagnosis disorders to relating to substance abuse, etc. And then they also narrow that a bit further down. So you've got basically two levels on the x-axis. The mental health strategy response in the province is also focused on dealing with mental health issues across the life cycle of a citizen. So it was therefore important also to categorize the evidence by population age, sort of. So you'll see this on the y-axis, where you've got specifically evidence related to children or adolescents, etc. And then also the type of document was important. So at different times, clinicians need to review research or sometimes refer to guidelines, or they need to access legislation, etc. So you've got the different types of document also there. And then the final categorization of the y-axis is whether the evidence is applicable to SA or outside of SA. So if you think about it, maybe research should generally be applicable, but if you're talking about a guideline for etc., you can actually include a guideline that's not applicable to South Africa, but where somebody can refer to that. Currently, the evidence map is home to about 60 pieces of evidence. At this point, all of this evidence is research, and specifically randomized control trials or RCTs. But the idea is that this evidence map will be living, so there will be updates every 6 months or annually. Unfortunately, the sourcing, reviewing, and grading of evidence takes time. But the map will be updated with new research, other types of research and circulars, policies, etc., as they are updated and reviewed. I think maybe just some things on the building of the map. So this specific map was easy to build, but this is actually a second iteration. The first iteration, there was a map developed and it was successfully developed, but there was more learnings in the process about that. Firstly, the Provincial Data Office learned a lot about the expectations from the evidence advisory group. But also the evidence advisory group learned a lot about what the benefits of the evidence map will be. I think we don't really have to go into all the bubbles and clicks and stuff like that. They basically work the same as the other evidence maps that was presented. So can you just how you can also see the research and stuff. But then yeah, just the end of so this map is currently in the final sign-off processes, but then again there will be processes put in place for updating the map at the regular intervals. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you, Faisal. Thank you for sharing with us the work that you've done on the evidence map for mental health. Also a very key important area within which we are applying ourselves in. Colleagues, we've reached the end of the case studies, and I was wanting to suggest that before we head into our last activity, that we may just revisit some of the questions that have been posted in the chat box. And please, again, feel free if you have any other input that you wish to make to raise your hand and then just to speak. I think I'm going to, maybe before just getting to the question that Volvia has asked, so I know that there's been questions around the actual software that's being used, whether it be EpiMap or EpiReviewer, and particularly the nature of that software, whether it's open source, whether we access it under license. So maybe either Zenat or Yusri, if you are able to maybe just give some guidance around that, that would be great.
Should I answer now? Okay,
Yes,
I was
yes,
about,
please,
yeah.
please go ahead.
So I was about to actually put it in the chat box. So yeah, as I said, the journey on the evidence mapping as a method, as part of a broader evidence synthesis, we do that with we learn these methods with our partners, or there was a partnering initiative called Responsive Evidence for Africa application, the application of policy. So I always get the acronym incorrect, people. So I'm not even telling myself to learn the acronym, all right? But it is a responsive evidence application of policy making with our Africa partners. So it's open source. I think Rian answered in that regard. And then before we actually embarked on it, JDP did extensive research. And so, as you know, he's our Shadow Minister for Technology. So I would leave it to him to actually answer, but it is on the Western Cape Standard List to use. Yeah. So we did do our inquiry about it at the start. That was a few years ago. But JDP, our Shadow Minister for Technology, will give you all the details if need, whatever additional you may require. Right? And then he will actually tell you where you can subscribe to also. So JDP, can you please put in the chat box? Yeah. And promise, thank you, responsive evidence system for African policy needs. Thank you. Is there other questions still that you would like me to answer?
Zenat, no, thank you for that. I think also just picking up on Rian Versveld's earlier comment, and maybe JDP, if you don't mind, maybe just putting the link to the Western Cape Data Portal in the chat box. So there are many documents, including the Western Cape Data Governance Policy Framework that we put in the portal, and is accessible to everybody to do so there. Jacques Depree, I see you have your hand. Please just briefly introduce yourself and make your comment or ask your question. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, just very quickly, I know I asked to post the comments and the thing, but I'm Jacques Depree, Provincial Data Office. I'm looking after the data portal and provincial spatial information. The EPI reviewer currently is being used under license from University of Johannesburg and is done in partnership with them. If anyone is interested in subscribing to it, it's a company in the UK. It's an academic organization in the UK that provides it. I will provide the details to their website. For now, it is part of our standards list. Just a caveat, if you are accessing EPI Mapper, just remember that in SharePoint, because it's an HTML product, it will not open. So we have circumvented that by opening up via My Content. And that allows us to then open it up. If you do search for it on the Open Data, on our portal, the Western Cape Data Portal, and you search for evidence maps, you will find it. If you then try and open it and it gets an error, you download it to your device and then open it. I will post it, but you're welcome to contact us if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacques. I think there's interesting questions, I think specifically around the case studies that were presented, and I would like to just try and see if we can ask our presenters to respond to Foley's, I think, 2 questions, specifically around how does evidence mapping resonate with your department, given a curiosity or indulgence or commitment? Is there a standard item in your toolkit going forward? And then at the same time also, and an important question, because one can see that there's a lot of metadata that is being created in the process. How is that being dealt with and how is it being recorded? So if I can maybe ask Faisal, Mushfiqa or Inga or Shalane to maybe just come off mute and maybe just give us some of your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Faisal, you'd like to come in here?
I see there's one question just from Sten. Let me just reply to that question. So he's saying that looking at the mental health map, there's a gap in terms of no evidence whatsoever, neither ADHD or autism. I think that's the beauty of the evidence map, is that you can actually plot your gaps. So you can see where there's a lot of research and where there's no research in this case. But also the mental health, if you look at the mental health evidence map, and if you look at the categories across the Y and the X-axis, it's trying to incorporate almost everything. So you're going to pick up gaps. And then I think the thing there in terms of updating and renewing and stuff like that is dealing with those gaps. So if there's a gap in your map, it means that your stakeholders who's using the map doesn't have anything there, and it's for you then to update and renew that. Thanks.
Thank you. Inga, would you or your team wish to come in just on how you've dealt with metadata as far as your own evidence map is concerned?
Okay, so thank you. So what we did was our data was all in a Excel spreadsheet. So we're a very small team. We literally had to divide it amongst ourselves, and we went through each item, and then we had to actually find where the document is online. So let's say it was on DBE, which is our national Department of Basic Education. Let's say it was one of their policies or legislation. We actually had to go and find, the URL to that document. And then we populated that also in our Excel spreadsheet. And then we sent that through to, I think it was Andile that we worked with. Andile. And then she actually populated the evidence map. So there was a lot of back and forth. We had to meet often. Sometimes there were errors. It was a very time-consuming exercise on our part. We actually haven't even completed it. We did phase 1, so we only looked at the policies applicable to schools. We still need to look at the ones applicable to head office. So we'll actually meet with each unit and go through the register we have, double check, are those policies still applicable or not? So that's how we did it. Maybe there's a shorter way, I'm not sure, but that was our methodology. Thanks.
Thank you. Mushfiqa and then Zinat.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Just say two or three pointers. The stage we develop the framework and looking at what to include in the framework is also quite a critical stage. And it is important at that stage to ensure that whoever is the owner or the final user or signs off on that framework. So once you've built that framework kind of in an Excel format before we start doing it in the software, any changes to the framework requires you to redo the map. So during this process, rather spend extra time to ensure and get it on paper that it's approved and the client is happy with that framework. And that is where the key expertise of PACE and the development teams come in, because you are able to, as a practitioner, maybe say or verbalize what it is that you want to see. And they are able to translate that into what it could potentially look like and then guide you on how to build your framework. So that is a very important step that we always drive with clients, that no changes to frameworks once it's signed off. And then I think the one difference that I just wanted to highlight was that if you're looking at the map that I presented on the data sources and you're looking at the education map, it's all been databases, Excel databases that we worked with existing evidence. When we did the mental health one, that was really the first time we went out and sourced academic evidence. So that was a quite a nice different approach to building the map. And on that, as Faisal mentioned, it's a living map. So also think about maintaining it going forward and say, okay, maybe for this round we've only identified RCTs. And maybe next year we want to look at policies, the way Shalane and Inga also alluded to, working on different updates. So when you're building your framework and you're thinking of those updates, the way the mental health map is built, it's built on a framework that will allow for updates second or third year, even though you'll see some of those gaps now and you'll only see orange bubbles, for example. But maybe when they include experiments, they will choose a yellow bubble, and then you'll start seeing that the map will populate a bit more.
Thank you, Mushfiqa. Zinat, please go ahead.
Chair, through you, usually the presenter can actually go first.
Yusri.
No, thank you. You know, as a teacher, which I am as well, I always like to connect theory with practice, and really the 6 steps which I alluded to in the beginning, you can really see it's been given life and substance in the practice of it, in terms of the in the real life situations. And the one thing, there's 3 things that I want to leave you with. And the first thing is, as much as is a tool to identify what is done, it is also a tool to identify what is not done. And that is so important to understand the gaps in your data sets. And the second one is, it should be living. Whatever you do, it must be living. You must build in update. You must build in updates in your processes. And the last thing is, again, I'm a parrot here, but grab everyone that you want, you know they must sign off at the end, grab them in the beginning and drag them with, and make sure that they're part of the process. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Yusri. We almost finishing off this segment, and I would want to just help us getting along there. But Zinat, I note your hand, so please go ahead.
Yeah, so I wanted to say in line with the question also on the metadata, as interestingly, the 30% didn't actually identify that the first step is the most important step. Now, there was a follow-up question, so why are you not thinking that way? But for me, importantly, during that first step, when you're actually asking your research, you're actually asking your questions that's going to answer the mapping of your evidence. That is where your metadata start, the formation of your metadata, because all the attributes of that evidence that you require will find space, resonance, and shape the framework that needs to be signed off prior populating the evidence. And that was a fundamental lesson in the mental health one, where the evidence advisory committee at mental health needed to verify, assure that they are comfortable in this strategy, in this framework, before the population of the evidence will occur. Because the moment the population of the evidence occurs, then it's inherent to the metadata. Thank you.
Thank you, Zinat. I note also for these last comments / question, and if I could maybe ask you, Sri, if you wouldn't mind, maybe just taking that and maybe just responding in the chat box to that. Okay, so we are, or as you will recall, that our first activity was designed to get you thinking about where you see the added value of an evidence map in your area. Now that you have some theoretical knowledge and some practical examples of evidence maps, it is time for our final activity. So we will ask you to identify where you see the added value of an evidence map within your area of work. The results will be presented as a word cloud, so it will be a nice visual to look at. And it should give us a sense of what these areas are, where there are common themes potentially, or common areas. And with the purpose of that, one can maybe explore this further through collaboration. So please go ahead and submit your answers. Okay, so as the votes and suggestions are coming in, policy seems to be quite big. We have evidence, policy development, policy coordination, performance planning. Yes, so I think, one can see as, responses come in, and you can submit more than one response. So please feel free to add more if you wish. But certainly, I think from this word cloud, one can establish also, that there are potential benefits already being identified through evidence maps that will lead into these particular areas as they are coming to the fore. Yeah, so thank you for submitting your responses. Mishvika, do we have time to just share maybe some of the results of the quiz, or should we continue?
Okay. Let me just answer the questions. I think the first one was quite open. All of those in terms of the interactive instrument, scoping tool, visualization tool were applicable in terms of what an evidence map is. The second question, in terms of how many steps are involved, there are 6 steps involved in building or developing an evidence map. The third question was on the most important step, and that was identified as clarifying the scope of question. But I do also think that as you go through the map in different contexts, there perhaps could be different steps that would be more important or equally important as clarifying the scope in question. And then which of these are not a benefit of an evidence map to navigate directions was the correct answer. And then obviously the poll is still running, and we can see in the chat on the word cloud and how that is taking shape. But all of this will be made available to the attendees as well.
Thank you, Mishvika. Colleagues, thank you. We have come to the end of the webinar, and I would like to hand over to Dr. Zinat Ismail for some closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, so perhaps we can close off the slide again in front of us, and everybody can show the nice faces. Don't be shy. I've got 3 minutes to make a closing remark, but it's more important to actually see you. So thank you for spending time with us. Nice to see you, Ayub Mohammed. And thank you to Department of Education, to Faisal that presented on behalf of the Department of Health, and Mishvika that actually brought back the history in terms of our first attempt and initiative to actually do the evidence mapping. So I'm pretty sure that I don't have to say anything much, but I want to leave you with a few questions, especially the cloud, the last exam question, how we can use it. And from a public sector perspective, can one wait until the end of a financial year or end of a political term to actually search for evidence? Or can we start using these evidence methods, this evidence map as a method within a broader family of evidence synthesis? And we don't need to know all the academic stuff, but at least know how to practice it. And can we start using it? If health can start using it for mental health, can we do that in the energy space? Can we do that in the job space, in the well-being space? So that there is a core evidence base for all departments to share. Something to think about. You know, somebody asked the question, you know, can we motivate, you know, the evidence mapping route? I think after this session, we don't even, for me, we don't need to motivate any longer. But I think it's very important to take that tip from the Department of Education that we need to have patience at the start. Because the biggest challenge we have is the validity and the reliability of our evidence when it needs to shape service delivery. And when we need to have public value of our data and evidence. Because ultimately, if the evidence map goes onto our portal or on our open data portal and the public start to access, can we be proud of our evidence or the validity and the credibility of our evidence? So I think we've seen from data sources to policies to circulars. And it was very interesting how important just the education circular to the principles are to our education system. And lastly, or finally for me, this is about living evidence. We are going to do a practice note on living evidence. It's new. It's innovative. So we are going to ask for partners who's interested, but we also want to use our own portal and the departments to use the concept and the approach of living evidence, whether it's the evidence map, which is your living evidence, to start using those methods to help us to build our evidence base. At the end of the day, when we do have a record of delivery, whether it's in a political space or whether it is in our own departmental space, we can show that we do have the evidence base for decision making. So when we use these fancy terms, evidence-informed decision making, evidence-informed policy making, what you have seen today, that is what it's all about. So I say thank you. That's my story.
Thank you, Dr. Ishmael. Thank you for bringing us to the close. If I maybe just add that we will be launched. Yes.
Yeah, Peter, sorry, I cannot end without saying thank you to our partners in the collaborative evidence initiative, responsive evidence system for African policy needs. Thank you.
Thank you. We will also be launching our data governance practice note on how to develop an evidence map, and we are going to be inviting you to provide any commentary that you may have. We'll probably leave about a 2-week time period for you to do so, so please be on the lookout for that. And I think this webinar hopefully will provide you some insights already when you receive the practice note that you can hopefully identify within that. So thank you everyone for attending today. Your participation and attendance has been really valuable. Enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.